Okay, this is our units 1.6 through 1.8. You don't need to do the reading, but I want to be able to go over them. All of these elements, including what's in unit 1.9, pattern and randomness, are all part of composition. This is the planning stage, how artists decide that artwork is going to look, and they plan for certain colors and certain movement and shape and meaning and all that stuff. And they lay it out and they plan it so that it is the most effective, visually interesting or appealing or attention-getting, whatever their purpose is. And for two-dimensional artwork, that means, looking at it a whole piece and deciding where everything goes. In a three-dimensional artwork, you've got to compose your piece from every single direction. If it's a full standing sculpture, all 360 degrees. So let's talk about these briefly. Unity, variety, and balance are the first three. Everyone understands what these three words mean, but in art, this is what they mean. Unity provides the cohesiveness in the work, okay? And there's three different types. The first one is compositional. This is where you take a formal element, usually, and you repeat it throughout the work in various areas over and over again so that it creates a unity and the work looks beautified. So you take line and maybe shape or color or a lot of these things and repeat them around, okay? This is an example of that, compositional unity. We have the entire piece is basically composed of shape, big flat shapes of color. The blues are repeated over and over throughout the piece. That arcing movement of that line of those shapes, that creates a unity. We've got everything outlined in sort of a dark outline. That creates unity. Everything has that sort of unified look, but the formal elements are repeated throughout the entire work. That's compositional unity. This is where the concept or the idea behind the work unifies it, okay? This is the Oxbow by Thomas Cole, and it's a large painting, of course, of the American West. And you'll see there's really two sides of the painting. There's the dark and stormy and wild side, and there's the calm, serene, well-lit, non-stormy side on the other. But one idea unifies the entire work, and that is the godliness, the goodness of taming the untamed West, bringing godliness, civilization, commerce in the 1830s when this painting was created was seen as a good thing. So one idea unifies a landscape that has really two different sides completely. Gestalt unity simply means you use compositional and conceptual unity all in one. The idea of closing the entire gap, like we visually want to close that circle. This is really a psychological concept. Variety, as a formal element, adds spice and interest to the work. Be careful you don't want a cacophony, an explosion that nobody can make sense out of. This album quilt from Baltimore in the 1848 period, 1850s, has lots of different things in it, but a lot of, to add interest, but a lot of things that unify it as well. All of the little things that are there, those little circular things they're all linked by theme. They're all nature-based themes, whether they're fruits, birds, plants, flowers, whatever, except for the book in the middle, and that's the focal point. We have the same colors being used throughout the entire work. The piece is built on a grid system, so that kind of structures it as well. But even though each individual thing is different, it's still unified by a lot of those repeated formal elements. So it's got compositional unity holding it together. Balance. we're going to be talking about 3 different kinds of balance. And balance is something that artists look for in work, and it's really a judgment. You have to train your eye to make sure your work looks balanced if that's the, if you want it to look balanced. Sometimes you don't, but most artists do most of the time. Symmetrical balance is the first kind. This is where you divide some of the work visually in half, and it's essentially the mirror image from one side to the other. It looks exactly the same. Like this photo here of this mantelpiece. If you divided the image right in half, one side of the mantle looked just like the other. And it tends to be very stable, somewhat predictable kind of compositional feel to it. But it can be used very effectively as an attention-getting device. Like this Rivera painting. This would be considered symmetrical composition. It's close enough if you divided the canvas in half visually. It looks similar enough on both sides that it would be symmetrical, but it adds to the power and the drama of those big calla lilies and the symbolism behind them. The little feet of the girls, I think that's very charming. Asymmetrical balance is, of course, the opposite, where you divide the composition in half and neither side looks the same, and that's typical of most artwork. This is an example of asymmetrical balance. What balances the work are some other things, but it's not it's definitely not both sides don't look, like mirror images of each other. That bright white and yellow on the inside the restaurant is counterbalanced against that lime green of the sidewalk and that sharp red of the back wall of that building across the street. All of those things kind of create that sort of balance. So when you squint, it still feels right. That's what balance is visually, okay? It's how it has to feel right on the work. I know that sounds real touchy-feely, but that's literally what it makes it a judgment and a training thing for artists. Radial balance is just like when you think of a radial tire, where the center of the composition is the main point, and everything emanates equally out from the center, just like the spokes of a wheel. This is a mandala. Right? This is in Tibet, but this is done across the world in lots of different cultures. So basically you sit on the ground and the Tibetan monks dribble and sprinkle different colored sand on the ground. And as they do this to make this beautiful mandala, they pray about something or meditate on a major theme like world peace or the ecology or something like that. And then after it's complete, like this one is here, it's destroyed as part of the ritual. And all the cultures do this, whether it's in the American Southwest or in India or anywhere else across the world that does this type of thing. But notice how the center of the composition emanates out equally to all the edges of the circle. Okay. All right, remember we talked about mass in Unit 1.2 being heavy, not size. Remember I warned you about the word massive. This is the art term for size, and that is the word scale. The other element that we're going to talk about here in this quick section is proportion. Okay, so let's talk about scale. What different scales mean in art. So if you ever want to use the word, it's got a large size, scratch out that word size and use the word scale. That's what I'm looking for in your examinations and in your formal analysis exercises, okay? Don't say it pops out, say contrasts. So small scale works tend to imply and convey in art intimacy, delicacy, preciousness, like that small little chick or that little baby. You bring it into yourself. You look at it closely. There's an intimacy with small scale artworks. Large scale works, of course, have meaning, power, importance, endurance, all those big things that you think of, okay? So let's look at these These are 2 Fabergé eggs. They're only about anywhere between an inch total to maybe 3 inches in size, including the stand. They're tiny. They're very small scale things. You'll see this on your Unit 1 study guide for sure. Fabergé eggs were created by Peter Fabergé, famous jeweler, for the Tsar of Russia. The Tsar of Russia commissioned Fabergé to give, so they could give out hundreds of these little things as gifts. The Tsar wanted to give them out to his family and his friends and other visiting dignitaries and other noblemen from other, the big wigs. And if you're the Tsar of Russia, Tsar Nicholas II, he's the last Tsar of Russia before the communists took over, you are going to give a good gift. You're going to give a precious gift. And naturally, these are made with all the real diamonds and platinum and gold and all the rubies and everything. Okay, it's all totally real. And you open some up and up pops sometimes a little mechanized little thing, like this icon of Christ that's going to be popping up out of the bottom of that egg, the inside of that egg. I've seen one where they up popped a solid gold replica of the Vatican. It was only about an inch tall at the most. It was tiny. And that small scale is the what you call the impressiveness. It's the wow factor of the artwork. Look at the intricacy. Look at the delicacy, the patterning. All right. So, what formal elements are here? Well, definitely small scale. That's the most important. Movement. Some of them have a moving image inside them, and patterning. That's it. Up pops the thing, but the small scale makes the Tsar look. It makes the gift more precious. It makes him look like a man of taste and refinement, and the receiver feels like he's getting something really special. But it does something for the artist too, and that is it shows off his technical virtuosity and skill. This is something done on a monumental scale. This is St. Peter's in Rome. This is just the cathedral. You have to walk down a 5-mile colonnade to get to the square where they kind of announce the Pope. And then there's the whole complex of Vatican City to go tour. Just the inside of the cathedral. Here's the square. Here's the square. This, if you look at the size of the people, is a true representation of what's just inside the Vatican, inside the cathedral itself. Just inside the cathedral. So the monumental scale here of this church is what tells you of the might of the Lord for Christians, the power of the Catholic Church, the endurance. It's supposed to overwhelm the parishioner and the people who are worshipers. It's meant to impress. It's meant to be forever lasting. All of that is incredibly important, of course, to the Catholic Church and to Christians. Hierarchical scale. Think of a business hierarchy where the president sits at the top of the ladder, and then there might be the vice presidents underneath him, and then maybe the managers, and then maybe the assistant managers underneath the managers, and then the workers at the very bottom. That's a hierarchy in business. In art, hierarchical scale looks like this. We have a hierarchy here. The very top of the painting, we see Christ and his parents surrounded by saints and angels, cherubim, seraphim. In the middle-ish area of the painting, we see the saved. They're being ready to be saved, because this is the Last Judgment painting, of course. And they're the ones being ushered up by the saints and prophets and everything up towards heaven on that left side. At the very bottom right is the damned. There's the hierarchy. Okay, you'll see it in all kinds of art, whether it's ancient Egypt or from Persia or China. The most important king or ruler or whatever is going to be the biggest. He's going to be at the top physically of the piece. That's hierarchical scale. And the last scale is distorted scale. And I included 2 YouTubes here. They're very short, but it will show you how scale can be used to be funny. This is the Men in Black's locker scene on the left here. Okay. On the right, it's going to be about proportion. That's the Seinfeld man hands, where Jerry goes out with a lovely young woman on a blind date. She's perfectly beautiful, except her hands, she's got the hands of a linebacker, and they're scary. And it totally freaks him out. That's where he used proportion, the artist used proportion there to create humor. Distorted scale often is meant to do that. Proportion is simply how things relate to each other like my nose is too big for my face. Or this woman, the drawing of this woman here has got some problems proportionally for her physique, okay? Either that or she's got a real problem with her backbone. Her breast is a little too low, her torso is too long, that's proportion, okay? It's how things relate to each other. Emphasis and focal point are the last ones we're going to talk about real quick. Artists use all kinds of things to emphasize the focal point, the main where you're supposed to focus the most, okay? So if I'm pointing at a student in a classroom, everyone's going to look at that student because I'm emphasizing them by that implied line of my hand and the radiating out from my fingertip towards the student. Contrast, foreshortening, movement, line, all of those things are used as emphasis because they're trying to draw your attention to the focal point of the work. The opposite of emphasis is subordination. Just like in a movie, there's the star of the movie, and then there's the supporting cast. The supporting characters are important, but they're downplayed in the role so that the star can shine. You have to do that same thing with art as well, with the visual arts, like in painting or sculpture. Some of the lesser things are important, but they're played down a bit so that we definitely get the focal point. This Nick Ut photograph from Vietnam, the little girl is the focal point, quite obviously, for several reasons. One, of course, she's nude. She's in the center of the composition. But she's also got the lightest value. She contrasts the most with the rest of the background. He actually did that on purpose in the darkroom. He took the photo, then he went into the darkroom, and he overexposed her so she would be the brightest thing in the piece. That's called using emphasis to create that focal point. So let's talk about this piece here briefly. I'm going to go more in depth into it in your review, but this is Bruegel's Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. Icarus was from the Greek myth. He wanted to fly. His dad fashioned some wings out of wax and feathers, and they went to the very tallest mountain in the world, and he jumped off and he flew. But he flew too close to the sun. Well, the gods let him do that, okay, because they didn't like him flying. Melted the wax, and he fell to his death in the sea. Oh, the great tragedy. All right, so where's Icarus in the painting? Well, if you look to the lower right, and you see that leg underneath, sticking out of the water, right underneath the boat, that's Icarus. But is he the focal point of the work? No. The man in the red shirt is the focal point. The red contrasts in his shirt with the analogous colored landscape making him the focal point instead of the subject of the work, who's Icarus. And that's the twist. Because the point of the painting is that in no plow stands still because a man dies. In other words, in the face of tragedy, life is going to go on. And that's it.